Welcome back to another episode of The Conscious Artist, a safe space for conversations around mental health awareness for musicians, artists, and all human beings. I am your host, Pallavi Mahidara. I'm a concert pianist and teacher, and I am absolutely thrilled that you are joining us today. My hope for this show is that it will give all of us a sense of solidarity and knowledge that we are not alone, and together, through these conversations, we can create more awareness and change for a healthier future. My guests today are the founders of Intermission, a groundbreaking program that unites body, mind, breath, and music making through yoga and meditation. They focus on exploring mindful movement, alignment, and breath work, both on and off stage. Both are very accomplished violinists and fellow Curtis alumni, and they have combined their love of music and yoga to create awareness for more holistic, healthy, and joyful music making. Please join me in welcoming Melissa White and Elena Urioste to the show. Ladies, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Hi. Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Pallavi.
Thank you for taking the time. I know you girls have very busy schedules, but it's such a pleasure to talk about this topic. You know, at a time when much fewer people were talking about mental and physical health, especially with their instruments, you girls started an initiative in the classical music world that gives an invaluable angle to physical health as artists. So I was wondering, would you mind telling us how Intermission came to be and how yoga found its place in your lives and with your instruments?
Absolutely. I'll start. Actually, for me personally, yoga became a part of my life while I was working on my master's degree at the New England Conservatory of Music with Donald Weatherstein. And he asked if I'd ever tried yoga. And I technically had, but not in a way that was meaningful. So essentially I said, no, it's not my thing. And he said, well, it just might be nice if you would you might feel the ground more and you could feel things slower in your body and it could help with the music making. So I had a friend who was going to this hot yoga class. She invited me and I said, sure, I would try it. And I went and I loved that particular class. What I loved about it was the postures were accessible upon first try, but then you had a second try to do everything. So you could immediately see progress or see what could be better or how you could work with your body to feel like you were making progress. So anyways, I stuck with this hot yoga program and I enjoyed that I could do it anywhere around the world, even traveling to play concerts. So fast forward, Elena and I first met at Curtis, but we came back together to meet up in New York City and became roommates there. So over our dinner table, we started talking about how individually we had come to a yoga practice and how much the yoga practice, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally, had helped with our violin journey performing on and off stage.
Because actually, unbeknownst to Melissa, I had found my way to the exact same practice the same summer. I was living in New York at the time and had just finished up my own grad degree. And I didn't have a teacher who suggested it, but I found my way to a hot yoga practice for personal reasons and also just immediately was captivated by the practice. I'd also done like one or two other yoga classes before that didn't quite resonate with me, but this very physical, very, dare I say, Western particular practice really appealed to like my type A personality. So I loved the heat. I also loved the accessibility of the postures. And I loved the mental clarity and the peace it provided. It was, a tough time in my life personally. So when I left class, I felt like really wrung out and it was so helpful for me. And yeah, sort of by accident, it had affected my violin playing in a really, really positive way. I found that things were easier on the instrument. I was developing a physical comfort that I had always yearned for, but never could quite figure out just on the instrument. It was like a trait about other players that I really envied, like a sense of ease around the instrument. And I felt like I was finally starting to experience a little bit of that. So yeah, when Melissa and we were both living in New York, we became roommates and we started talking over many dinner table conversations about all of the the happy effects that yoga was. Oh, actually, no, even before we were roommates, we started going on tour together with the Sphinx organization.
Yes.
And since we'd both come to this yoga practice, we were like, oh, should we try and find some studios on tour? And we did. And it became an integral part of those Sphinx tours as well. And sometimes when we couldn't find a studio, we would turn our hotel room into a hot yoga studio, crank up the heat, and try and guide ourselves through the postures. So yeah, sorry, Melissa, that was a very long interruption. You can take it away again.
No, but that was a very nice interruption, because you're right. Those bits came into place, chronologically speaking, which did lead to the discussion at our dinner table about how much we would have loved to have been introduced to any sort of body, mental, mindfulness, physical practice while we were younger, going to music camp, practicing 5 and 6 hours a day, playing our instrument, and only thinking about trying to nail notes. And we thought, what if we had been teenagers at a music program with the idea of well-being as a human being and a full person? And that just seemed like out of this world, sort of crazy, but we thought we could do this. And so we talked about it. And then we got to the part where with children, who would watch these students like at nighttime and make sure everything else was going well.
Yeah, there were like a few minutes where we thought we could run a camp for kids, and then quickly realized that we could not and would not.
Yeah. So long story short, we started with a retreat for peers our age, adults, and the community that came out of that the first summer, which was 2017, was absolutely magical. And that was the inspiration to grow this, and to see that so many more musicians and artists like ourselves needed this community and this safe space to talk about lots of things.
I love that so much. What a great story. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And it's just so wonderful to see how yoga has helped you both with your physical health, your mental health, and how it's positively affected you with your instrument. And I know that it has brought a lot of peace and sort of solidarity, I think, to the music community, because I know, as you say, a lot of people have struggled with, maybe not feeling comfortable with their instrument or feeling like they're not balanced within. And I'm happy to be able to join you girls in this sort of mental, physical health platform where we're trying to create a slightly safer and healthier environment for performing artists. And I'd love to chat a little bit more about yoga and the mind and how yoga has helped you to balance your mental health state. Elena, you mentioned, coming out of a class feeling a lot more balanced. As we know, doing any sort of physical activity inevitably helps our mental state, produces endorphins, and it's kind of like meditation in motion. But what is it specifically about yoga that has really helped you to feel more balanced in your life?
I think with the particular practice that both Melissa and I started on, it, as I mentioned, is a very physical, in fact, sort of militantly so brand of yoga. It's not for the faint of heart, I would say. It's very muscular, and the heat, of course, provides a big challenge, even if you have lots of experience balancing on one leg, say. It's another story to do it at 105 degrees Fahrenheit. It's just very, it's really intense. So not being a particularly sporty person up until the first time I set foot in a hot yoga class, I was just pretty unused to the feeling of maximum exertion. So after my first few yoga classes, I found myself feeling stronger than I'd ever felt. Like my body physically felt sprightly and sort of alert, and I just felt like I had much more strength even over the course of a few sessions. In addition, I think the malleability that this hot practice afforded my body was really addicting. I loved the feeling of coming out of a class, as I said, sort of wrung out, like I'd squeezed out a wet dish towel. And I started to notice the real effects of that whenever I would pick up the violin. It was as though the channels had sort of cleared from my brain to my fingertips, and like there was nothing getting in the way of a command from my brain going to my fingers on the instrument. And my muscles just felt much more sort of limber and quicker to react. I started noticing things. You mentioned balance. Literally, I started being able to recognize imbalances from one foot to another, because in this practice, you do a lot of work balancing on one foot and then the other. You start to realize which leg you favored, how you distribute your weight across the sole of your foot. All of these little things, they help, of course, in the yoga practice, but in a more general sense, you just start to become more attuned to the finer points within your body. So I would say, literally, I was becoming more balanced. I noticed that I had been favoring my left foot for all of the years that I'd played the violin, and that my right leg was considerably weaker. So I was able to start thinking about, how do I distribute my weight, not only on the yoga mat, but when I have the violin in my hand. So I started working my way towards literally better balance, but also the muscular changes, as I mentioned, the sort of a sense of clarity within the body. It was like the clouds were lifting, and I was just able to be better aware of how each body part was working and how the whole ecosystem connected.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you just said, Els. But I loved especially how you talked about the clarity between the pathways of the mind and the muscles, and particularly the tiny muscle groups that we use as instrumentalists, because it's hard to explain how not practicing at the instrument, but doing something physical can apply to the instrument when you come back to it. And you can't convince someone of it enough until they do it for themselves and they see what it feels like to have that clarity.
It's true. So many people are convinced that the only way they're going to improve at their craft is to do the craft over and over and over and over. And often you need to take a step back and do something entirely different, but equally or perhaps more constructive to experience the benefits.
And the other thing I have really started thinking about is how much just that then starts to help you trust yourself in a different way. And so that trust, when you bring it on stage to perform, is something that you've built with yourself. And so then comes inside out, instead of what happens as musicians is, we have lessons, we have coachings, we have friends listen to us in the audience, and we're looking to find trust from the outside in to convince ourselves we've got this, we can do it, we'll be all right on stage. But when you start to build that for yourself from the inside out, it's just a different sense of security and really beauty and fun on stage. That's also something that I've really enjoyed. And then the last thing is, this particular practice we were doing in the hot room takes place in front of mirrors. And so to spend that much time sweating, being tired, having the mental journey of this is awful and I'm horrible, but wait, I just did this. We made it. That whole journey during the class, not to be cheesy, but it makes you fall in love with some part of yourself, whatever that is. It's unique, it's individual. And that is something that I have found great to build upon.
Definitely. I also think it's not just this particular type of yoga. And in fact, it's not just yoga. It's any sort of mindful movement practice. I think it starts with the physical, but the physical element of the practice is, the more you do it, the more you learn that it is merely a gateway into something deeper. So, all of the postures you're doing, it's not just to make shapes with your body, though, that's fun and it gives a nice visible sense of achievement. But what it really does is it clears out space within you to start to work on whatever it is that you're really seeking, whether it's peace, whether it's quiet, whether it's a way to manage your own anxiety or nerves, which of course is super duper handy when it comes to performing. It really just affords you the time, the space, and the ritual to delve deeper, which of course is then where mental and emotional health comes in. So I would say really the physical element of any of these practices, it's just a very small portion of a larger picture.
Wow, this is so beautiful. Thank you, girls, both for sharing your stories and your experiences with yoga, because I feel that the way you describe how yoga has positively affected and shaped yourselves and your mental state and your lives, frankly, it's funny. That's how I feel about therapy. um, I started going to a therapist about 2 years ago to the first lockdown, and it was sort of, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's similar, but for me, it was the first time I was given these tools.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And I think perhaps it's the same with what you guys were doing in the hot yoga classes. I've done a lot of yoga before in my life, and it's funny, I've actually never liked hot yoga for the biggest reason that every time I feel like I'm going to pass out within like 5 seconds of entering the class.
Yeah.
And when I do yoga, I tend to prefer the slower, more meditative yoga practices like hatha yoga or even Kundalini. But in any case, I've always admired those who can actually stomach the hot yoga classes. Because as you say, it's not for the faint-hearted. But I suppose, as you said, it literally, but also figuratively gives you a chance to look in the mirror. And it's giving you a chance to see tangible results, to be kinder with yourself.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
You're absolutely right. It's less about yoga specifically and more about carving out space to listen to what your own body needs. And whatever that is for the individual is what it is.
I think if you can come to the mat with as open a mind as possible, and of course that sounds sort of cliche, you'll find that we would laugh about it after certain classes. Every teacher is different, and some are very by the book, and they just want you to rattle off the poses, but some put an immense amount of thought and care into what they're saying. And so many times we would come out of a class together and be like, did you hear that thing they said? Like that's would be so applicable to music. Or you would absolutely hear that in a great violin lesson, or like a great conductor say something like that. So we also started just listening to the yoga teachers hungrily, because it was like they were also feeding us gems that we could directly put into music, which was so helpful. And it also started to make us think, like, we call it a yoga practice, like you are practicing, you show up every day or however often you're doing it, and you try things. And the idea of like beating yourself up or getting super down on yourself or cursing yourself because you might fall out of a posture, that would be so utterly ridiculous. But the amount of times that most of us as musicians have done the equivalent, like negative self-talk in the practice room with our instruments, it really made us stop and think, how are we speaking to ourselves in the practice room every day? Like, would we ever be this cruel to ourselves in a yoga room? Or would we ever be this cruel to someone else that we cared about? So that sort of mirror, more spiritual mirror, was very enlightening.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. I love what you said. We wouldn't talk to our best friend the way that most of us have spent our childhood and adolescence and probably our early adult years speaking to ourselves. And the difference between constructive thoughts and destructive thoughts is so great and so powerful. It's funny, what you said about coming to the mat with an open mind. I think it's the same way, again, when we go to our instruments. Also, if, one goes to therapy, for example, if you are open to change, if you're open to growing, if you're open to putting in the work, if you're open to failing, because, failing only happens when you try. A guest of mine in the previous season said that, and I just loved that statement. Failing only happens if you try. That only means that you're trying, that you're putting an effort, you're looking to grow. I'm curious to know if you ever felt like you were comparing yourselves to others in the yoga studio, because we all know that we do that a lot in the practice room, on stage, as musicians, as artists. And, it's very important that we only compare ourselves to ourselves and just try to compare our progress to what we did yesterday or 5 minutes ago and where we'd like to go. But, it's very easy in the yoga room, in the yoga studio, you see everyone around on their mats. And I have definitely fallen prey to this where, I go into a class and I see these people who are just so incredibly flexible and so advanced and doing like these amazing postures. And of course I start to feel like, oh, I can't do that. Or I wonder if I'll ever be able to do that. Or am I too old to do that? I'm curious to know. Of course, that's not true because you see like incredible, like 70 and 80-year-old men and women just killing it on the yoga mat. So was that ever an issue for you girls? And how did you overcome that?
Yes. Well, I'll start. So Elena and I have practiced countless yoga classes together, standing side by side. And so between the two of us, Elena is just extremely flexible. Not even between the two of us, for the world. Elena is very flexible. And so there are classes where she does these postures and they're so stunning that even the teacher will want the class to see it, because usually when you're doing a posture, your eyes might not be on other people. So anyway, so she'll come out and Elena will demonstrate these postures that look stunning. And so I get to see them all the time because I'm standing right next to her. So I have that treat. But of course, in my head, I'm like, oh, look how beautiful that is, Melissa, as you stand straight and not even, you think you're bending, you're not even moving, Melissa. But at the same time, since I love Elena so much, it was never a jealousy thing. Also because if one spine can do this, how am I going to make my spine do something? So it's not even a jealousy or a feeling like I'm lesser than.
Well, it better not be, because let me tell you, it is utterly useless to have like a flexible thoracic spine. I mean, it's really not, it's the uppo staccato of body stuff. It's really not helpful. Just FYI.
Touche. There's that, to be completely true. But also to be able to start to see others as inspiration is a big thing I picked up in the yoga studio as well. Right. And so standing next to Elena, I know when we get to these things, her body is very tired. So mentally, what it takes to perform, quote unquote, or what it takes to choose to do this or not to do that, like there still is a mental game happening for her. And I think about that for everyone in the yoga room. There are people who, for them, it's much more difficult, like you were saying, Pallavi, just to enter the room and stay there. Listen, you have gotten yourself over a huge mountain. So absolutely. Thinking about how the mental game for everyone is different, but the power that we're in it together and being strong enough for yourself is ultimately what it's about. And so even just that practice of reminding myself that has been a great takeaway. Like for music making, it's meant to be inspiring. It's meant to be a conversation on stage, right? So if someone does a line that's so beautiful, it doesn't help to then simply think, I'll never play it as beautifully. But what if you could say something back that would inspire newness or inspire a different route of beauty? And so I think about that a lot now.
There are so many ways to be amazing. So like what you might notice, Melissa, is like this particular curvature in my spine that makes certain postures look very attractive. I would say right back to you, first of all, like Melissa is infinitely stronger than I am. So I would say most bodies are tipped towards either being slightly more flexible or slightly stronger. And I think one of the physical, not even goals, explorations that yoga can provide is helping you balance, like find balance between strength and flexibility. So like Melissa is just infinitely stronger than I am. I've never seen her like sit out a lot of poses where I conveniently decide to take some breaks, most of which involving leg strength. But also one of the things that inspires me so much about practicing next to you is you never let on that something is overwhelming to you. Like no matter what's going on with the temperature, with how tired you are, with how your muscles might be feeling, like you have this absolutely beatific expression on your face at all times, which I always found really inspiring. And I would always be like, oh, okay, well, she can do it. So maybe I can find it within myself too. Like, I'm going to pretend to be calm too. And in fact, like, yeah, I would do my like backbendy thing and then like collapse out and just sit down for a while. Like, no, I can get back up because Melissa's up and I want to do. But I would say in general, the topic of comparison is such an interesting one because I haven't met anyone, especially newbies to yoga, who mention that like, oh, but everyone's going to be so amazing. I'm not flexible enough. I can't even touch my toes. What if I just go in and like everyone's looking at me? To which I always say, touching your toes is utterly irrelevant. No one's looking at you. They're doing their own thing. And like, these are very valid feelings. It's okay to feel this way. But I have a feeling that once you get in the room and start going, you're going to forget all about this. Inevitably, that does happen, to myself included. Some days I'll show up into a yoga class and be like, oh, that person looks really fit, really, they're going to be really great. Or like, oh, that guy over there, he looks really serious. And I'll maybe keep thinking about them for like a minute or two of class. And then I get swept up on my own thing and I kind of forget that they're there, other than like in a really positive way. Like, oh, these people have all come into the same class and their energy is only helping the situation. And then I just wanted to touch on comparison with yourself. I think this is something that happens both in the musical practice room and in the yoga room. So often in a yoga class, especially if you're doing the same practice consistently, I would find myself being really frustrated if my progress wasn't always linear. You know, I would find myself showing up, doing a posture and being like, wait, but this is actually worse than yesterday. How, like, why? And I think a regular yoga practice has taught me that every day is different. Every moment is different. And it's not only unfair to compare yourself to the person standing next to you, it's also unfair to compare yourself to the person you were yesterday, even if that person seemed marginally more successful at whatever the task at hand was. We are constantly evolving. And I think yoga really teaches you to meet yourself where you are in any given moment. And so what if it doesn't look as shiny as yesterday? That's not the energy, that's not the ability, that's not what you're bringing to the table in this moment. And that is totally okay. It is necessary to meet yourself where you are in any given moment, because that means that you're really being present and you're being honest with yourself. And tomorrow might be a totally different ballgame. And I think that is a lesson that has also been really helpful to me musically. Every time you step into the practice room and every time you step on stage, it doesn't have to be better in air quotes than it was the previous day or the previous minute. Just show up, and any note that you play is merely a snapshot in time. It's not some culmination of all of the work you've ever done, and if you don't deliver it exactly how you want it, you lose. Like, no, it's just every moment is a snapshot.
I like that.
I love that so much. And I love that you mentioned how progress isn't linear. And I think that's such an important reminder that progress isn't linear, growth isn't linear, healing isn't linear, grief isn't linear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, none of these things are linear. Time, honestly, isn't linear. In the Western world, we believe it is, of course. But if you really think about it, we come back in phases. Things cycle back. Here we are 12, 13 years after graduating, and look how we're coming together in this way,
Totally.
in a completely different setting, talking about things that mean so much to us in individual ways.
Yeah, and that we had no concept of 12 or 13 years ago.
No concept of. And this actually brings me back to a point that you mentioned earlier. Both of you mentioned that part of the reason you started Intermission was because you wished that you had had something that could have guided you in your teenage years. I guess we can credit the pandemic to bringing mental health awareness a little bit more to the forefront. But it's part of the reason why I started this podcast, just to help bring more conversations and more awareness to the things that we all had to learn on our own, and we all struggled with on our own. And I love what you said, Elena, about being present and meeting yourself where you are at. And I think, as you said, in the practice room, but also in life, we literally are not the same person that we were yesterday or 5 minutes ago or who will be tomorrow. And I think when we reach a certain level, perhaps in our artistic fields, we understand that we maintain a sort of equilibrium, but more or less it's going to fluctuate around that, but it's never going to be exactly the same. And some performances are going to be like, we're going to feel like we're spot on, we've nailed it, we're really solid, balanced. For example, like we really feel like we've got everything in our fingers, in our body, in our minds. And other days it's, we're just trying to catch the ground.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
We're human.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay, And I think, as you said, it's just an important reminder to be kind with ourselves, to be forgiving with ourselves, to be gracious with our own progress. I wanted to know if yoga and bringing yoga into your daily life, and as you say, it's a yoga practice, but it's not just physical. It's perhaps, even if I can say, a way of life for you at this point. How has that helped you with, any sort of performance anxiety? If you girls have had any, overcoming any sort of insecurities, doubts, fears, how has it helped you in that way?
Absolutely. I think for both of us, it's been a huge help in that way. For me personally, my performance anxiety comes through, first of all, mentally. I notice that I start speaking doubt to myself. And then physically, it translates into my bow hand not wanting to move, like feeling stuck. And the best way forward is to not move, which is just that's not going to work on stage being a violinist, right? And so something that's been a huge help, first of all, is doing breath work. Everyone talks about breathing, and when it comes time to tap into the breath, whatever that means, taking a deep breath, if we haven't practiced it before the moment we need it, then like anything else, it's not really going to be that meaningful to our body. It's not going to translate into a way that feels like it's working, quote unquote. But doing the breath work when you're not in a high anxiety position helps to know what you're tapping into when that high anxiety kicks in. And aside from physically changing the body and changing the mental space, it also personally helps me to feel like I'm owning my space. And with owning your space, then you can feel a little bit more powerful, that you can do something about it. And I'm not going to lie, even on this podcast, from the first question you asked and I just started speaking, I was listening to myself in real time thinking, what is this story you're telling, Melissa? And then when you interjected, I was like, Melissa, you can take a deep breath and think before the words come out of your mouth. And I literally did. I took a couple deep breaths. I was like, Melissa, you're speaking to these people who you really enjoy, and it's a lovely conversation, and the expectations are only what I put on myself. We simply mean to talk to each other. We simply mean to share ideas and maybe think about our listeners and what might be helpful. And really, and if it's not helpful, to provide something for them that is meaningful, but truly that's honest. And so when we tap into ourselves and we tap into a space where we feel safe being honest, I think we notice that then the expectations perhaps feel a little bit more within our control. Not that we'll change them. It doesn't mean I'm going to make all the notes now and they're all going to be in tune, but it could change the journey with how I experience going for these notes and experience playing these tunes for the audience or with my colleagues if it's chamber music, whatever that means. So getting back to your question about how that translates into anxiety going on stage or any fears, Elena and I both continue to remind each other that it is a practice, it's ongoing, and we'll never reach some point of perfection where we're the ultimate role models at all. But with reminding each other and then sharing with others that it's a practice we still do, there can continue to be growth. And hopefully we can grow the space of feeling safe.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Melissa, and for your vulnerability, because honestly, that speaks volumes. And I can completely relate to so many things you said about breathing. But Elena, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, certainly from a physical perspective, the breath work above pretty much anything else has been the biggest game changer for me. My anxieties also manifest in my right arm, but for me, it's the shakes. I spent years and years and years really rearranging my bowing in all of my pieces just so that I wouldn't have to play a down bow. And I went through all of these sort of like trials and tribulations, doing different stuff with my fingers and my arm and my elbow, when really what I just needed to do is take an exhale before I put the bow on the string. So something as simple as recognizing that holding your breath is not an optimal way to, draw sound from a string instrument. Yoga has definitely illuminated that for me. I would say also going through, having experienced so many different teachers and their classes and their pearls of wisdom, and then going into yoga teacher training to become teachers ourselves. I think I've learned a lot, or just like collected little gems that have, they don't work every time, but like I've been able to collect a lot of things to put in my toolbox to sort of revisit when I am feeling surges of doubt and insecurity before going on stage. I think learning to become a yoga teacher, I chatted a lot with one of my instructors about how the goal shouldn't be performative. And that was something I found myself working on a lot in yoga teacher training, just being a natural and practiced performer. How could I get away from that actually as a yoga teacher? Because in fact, it's not about me at all. The goal is to guide your students through an experience. And then one of my instructors pointed out that why couldn't performing be that also? So that's one of the things I love thinking about now before I set out on stage, that I'm not performing for or at people, but rather I'm just the person who's taking charge of guiding everyone through a communal experience. Because isn't that what a concert is? Or like any musical endeavor? We're all ideally experiencing this thing together. You want to hold space for people to experience whatever it is they need to experience in their own way. That, I think, should be the goal of a yoga class, of a musical experience, really any meaningful thing. You just want to hold space for people. So that's something that I think about a lot, and that usually winds up helping me. It takes the pressure of being a trained circus animal out of the equation, and you're just there to sort of be a conduit.
I love it. I know what you mean. Somehow, as I've gotten older, I have become less comfortable with the thought of people staring at me, which when we come out on stage for a concert, effectively is what's happening. So, and in my head, I'm like, no. And so I love this idea that we are the conduit. And I've also started, even with my students, I talk about when people come to a performance, they want to hear and observe how you feel about the music. If they just wanted to hear all of the notes of this specific piece, they could put on any recording. They could look them up for themselves and play all of them, perhaps, if they play the instrument. So that's not why they came. They came for an experience. They came to see how you will guide them through this experience, even if they don't use those words per se. And they definitely did not come to see you fail. So it's like,
I was going to say that too. Yes, thank you.
Everyone in the room we're on the same team.
Yeah, unless you're a real asshole. But I think there are very few of those populate the concert halls. I think in general people are hoping to have a nice experience, so they don't want you to do your worst. Another pearl of wisdom that I got from my yoga teacher training was this idea of doing your best. We hear it all the time from when we're little kids, people encouraging you to do your best. And I don't know about you guys, but you hear it so many times that it becomes a thing that holds no meaning anymore. But to me, it also became sort of an unattainable goal. Your best is this far off mystical concept that you'll strive for your entire life, but probably never achieve. But actually, one of my instructors, he was like, I actually think that most of us are doing our best at any given point. We are doing our best with the information and the energy we have available. And I was like, whoa, I've been doing my best this whole time. Cool. And I take that with me both onto the stage and then even more importantly when I come off the stage. Like, yes, there will always be things that I wish had gone a different way, not even better necessarily, just like a different way. But if I'm in a charitable mood or like in a kind mood, I will review and say, given the information and energy of that moment, I did my best. And it's actually very liberating. Like, your best isn't some enchanted far off thing. It is what's happening for most of us. I mean, unless you're being deliberately lazy and careless, which I think very few of us are. I think everyone is doing their best most of the time.
I love that. It feels like perhaps doing our best, in quotes, has been conflated with reaching our maximum potential at all times, rather than, as you say, doing our best in this moment. We are doing our best with the information that we have, with the knowledge that we have, with the awareness that we have. Most of the time, we are giving 100 or 150 or 1,000%.
Mm-hmm.
But our best may not be in any given moment our maximum potential, but we have no idea what our maximum potential could be because we can't see the future.
Right. And that ties into meeting yourself where you are. If you meet yourself where you are and do your best, what else is there really?
I love that. And Melissa, going back to what you started saying, and Elena, how you followed up with breathing and breath work, I'm so glad you girls mentioned this, because breathing has become literally like one of the most important aspects of my life. And it started several years ago when I had an injury, my shoulder blade up through my neck to the back of my head. And it turned out that it came from not breathing correctly, that I was only shallow breathing, basically, only breathing into my chest. And it was the first time in my life where someone told me, you don't know how to breathe. And it changed everything for me. I mean, I actually started practicing breathing. I would spend 10 minutes at a time, a few times a day, sitting up, lying down, like breathing into my stomach, the way singers are taught, the way wind players and brass players are taught.
We've actually learned even not all of them are necessarily taught. They're taught like survival breathing for their instruments.
Interesting.
Sometimes, and not like, exploring their full breathing potential. So
interesting.
I say that just because I feel like pianists and string players were often like, oh, like they've got it all figured out, but everyone is learning and practicing, and
Wow. Well, I mean, I guess with pianists and string players, like we can literally play while holding our breath, you know? And I remember the first time, as you said, exhale, the first time I started to understand that exhaling before I start the first note of a piece or the first note of any phrase, or if I want to play something very quietly or something, that's fortissimo, in any scenario, exhaling is what gives me 99% control or mastery. And I remember learning that so many years ago and recognizing and realizing like what a difference it made. And it also, as yoga has done for you, breathing, it completely changed the way I felt at the instrument. It led me to a place where I think I have the best posture at the instrument than I do at any other point. Any other chair, I'm like slouching. But at the piano, I'm very aware of it and I'm very relaxed, engaged. My muscles are engaged but relaxed. And I love how you both spoke about that because it's so important. And I teach my students this every single class. Breathe, breathe, breathe. And often we're not taught that breathing means to exhale. Singers and wind players and brass players literally cannot make a sound unless they're physically exhaling. But as we know, we can hold our breaths and play. And, depending on your lung capacity, you can hold it for like a few pages. So at least piano pages, maybe.
Yeah, not violin pages.
I just love how this conversation is connecting us with people of our past. We go on and we take these journeys and they take us far away and they're adventurous and they're fun. And they all look glamorous, or they can look glamorous on the highlight reel of social media. But to be able to connect and just genuinely chat and be honest and feel comfortable, I think is a great space to have. And so thank you for having us.
Yeah. I also love about hearing about people's sort of parallel discoveries in this whole field of physical and mental health. Like, I love that you drew the connection between what we were talking about and your own experience with therapy. And I think, like, the thing that we like to share with people is yoga, because it's what has worked for us. But we then provide the disclaimer, like, it does, if yoga doesn't resonate with you, that's totally fine. But search for something that brings you out of the, very, for many of us, limited sphere of music making, at least the way a lot of us were trained. Just find something that opens your mind, that makes your body feel good, and allows you to approach the thing that you love from a different perspective. Because I think all of these paths are wonderful, and hopefully they'll all lead us to places of greater comfort and joy and peace with what we're doing, and just with our lives in general.
Yeah.
I love that. I suppose it's any sort of work, if I may use that word, that we do to help benefit our bodies, our minds, or our souls is a form of therapy.
Completely.
Yes. And there's this quote I remember reading last year: surround yourself with people who are committed to growth, because the conversations are different. And I love, as you said, I love how us not having seen each other for so many years, or even really had the chance to speak to each other for so many years, we're able to connect on this fundamental level of self-growth, self-awareness, and bringing that awareness to our instruments and trying to find healthier and happier ways to exist as human beings and artists.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you, girls, so much for being here.
Thanks. You, Pallavi, for having us.
Thank you all so much for listening. I am truly grateful for the support from each and every one of you. If you would like to submit any questions or topics for us to address on the show, you can send us a message on our Instagram page, @ConsciousArtistPodcast. Help us to spread more awareness by sharing this episode with your friends, your colleagues, your teachers, and your students. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Sending you all so much love and strength to tackle this week, and we'll see you next Monday for another episode of The Conscious Artist.